Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 25th of October, 2025. This is a hits and losses video giving you a synopsis of what's taken place in Ukraine for the last 24 hours militarily. And I'm a little bit upbeat today because I'm late coming to this video. Both my twins, 15-year-old boys, they play football, one in the A-League, and Ozzy, who plays in the D-League just after a 5-year hiatus and not playing football, started up again, and he's having a great season. It's 5-3 today against the local rivals. He scored the first 3 goals, got a hat-trick, got an assist. Just absolutely tremendous match, and he played really super well. So I'm upbeat. I've got my cup of tea in my Ukraine mug in my man cave. So let's get on with it. Hits and losses it is. Okay, so we'll start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. 910 personnel loss. That's slightly down on what we have seen over the preceding couple of weeks, but it's been under 1,000 for a couple of days now. 4 tanks, a single armored combat vehicle, 15 artillery systems. That's actually a drop from what we've seen. And also 80 automotive, so 80 vehicles and fuel tanks is a drop from what we have seen. So I think that's probably suggestive of the Russians not attacking quite as much as they were. But they seem to be taking a bit of a, I don't know if taking a beating is the right term, because actually it's really difficult on the front line. The Ukrainians are under the cosh in a number of places in a serious way. But for every square kilometer that the Russians take, they are taking incredible losses. Nothing unusual. This has been the case for the entirety of the war, but actually starting to see quite a lot of montage videos coming out at the moment, suggesting that the Russians really are having a hard time. Andrew Perpetua, who looks at all of these videos with his team across the different social media platforms, he says, roughly speaking, for each 4 Russians we see killed in combat in the videos that they look at, we see 1 Ukrainian, and they go out their way to look at Russian sources as well. So it's not a selection bias. So that's a 4-to-1 ratio. Sometimes it's 3-to-1, sometimes 5-to-1, but sometimes 1-to-1. But on average, it's about 4-to-1. I don't see any difference in relative wounds to death rates. You would only really see that later on in the process. So it's very difficult for him to look at that kind of challenge that the Russians particularly have in a lot of their wounded in action, WIA, turn into killed in action later. So that can compound this already bad ratio for the Russians here to seeing that. Well, he's not going to see that, but it's clear, I think, from a number of different data points that we've looked at and sources, that the Russians really struggle in terms of maintaining wounded as being wounded. Okay, now, given that's the case, it's interesting that there are a number of videos coming out just of successive personnel kills for the Ukrainians on the Russians here with their drones. The amount of Russian meat left to die, says Max 25, at the positions of the 63rd Brigade in Torska and Zarichna continues to grow. Here are 20 fresh proofs. So this is a montage video, and I won't play it to you. It's nothing, like, you don't see any deaths here, but these are, and I wonder actually with these whether these are counted as deaths for Andrew Perpetua, because actually they cut out. You don't know whether there's an injury or what here, but or whether it's a death. But here we see people being attacked by FPV drones. Obviously, they cut out just as they hit. So why am I showing you this? Well, one, there's a lot of these coming out at the moment, and I think that's indicative. So I think the Russians are taking heavy casualties. And 2, it shows you that it is 1 drone for 1 person, often more than 1 drone for a person, as you know, they end up finishing, it sounds horrible, but finishing injured troops off, which I suppose is, at least there's some degree of mercy there, but I don't know what the calculation is for these units militarily, because I was led to believe that actually, and this is going to sound really awful because I'm dehumanizing the nature of war here, but from a very military strategic point of view, injured soldiers are arguably worse than dead soldiers. So yeah, okay, they can come back and be used again, yeah, after they've rehabilitated or gone and sought treatment, etc., etc. So that's a negative. But the positive for having an injured soldier rather than dead soldier is that it then becomes resource intensive to get them off the battlefield, to get them back to medical attention, to give them that medical aid, and then to rehabilitate them back to the point of getting them back on into the war. And that is just a big drain on the resources for the opposing side. I mean, this is the same for anyone anywhere in war. Here, if you've got an injured Russian soldier, they're going to need 2 to 4 Russian colleagues to get those comrades to get that soldier off the front line, and that causes an issue because those troops focused together become a greater a bigger target for the Ukrainians in this case. And so an injured soldier can actually be, I think, more use than a dead soldier for a number of different reasons. However, I've seen an awful lot of videos of Ukrainian drone crews taking out injured soldiers and making sure that they are dead. So I wonder what's going on there. Anyway, something to think about. It's quite macabre. Sorry for that, but we are reporting on war. And here we have another montage video. Ukrainian FPV drone operators from the Spartan unit tracked and struck Russian troops in the Pokrovsk axis. And I guess, the idea is that if you've got enough drones, FPV drones, and they're costing $300 to $400 to get to procure, then I guess that's a really good ratio. And there must be a military economic calculation that one does. If you're happy to use an artillery round to try and take out a human being, from either side, and an artillery round is worth this much money, then a drone is going to be much, much cheaper. In fact, arguably drones are one of the cheapest ways of eliminating enemy soldiers. So $300 to $400 is absolutely good calculation to make there. And that then we can take that on to say, well, how many drones is acceptable to take out a human? I guess you just keep going, but there are times when you're going to be throwing 3 or 4 drones into killing a single human in a particular context. So a horrible conversation to be having, but I think it's an important one to think about. Right now, talking about what's going on the front line, situation in Pokrovsk is now even more critical. More than critical. There are at least 250 occupiers in the city, so Russian soldiers in the city of Pokrovsk. They engage in gun battles and shoot Ukrainian soldiers in positions. Logistics in the city is under full control of drones. Ukrainian soldiers walk to their positions 10 to 15 kilometers on foot. This is something that Russians have had to do in a number of places. Ukrainians doing that when they're trying to defend Pokrovsk. Lots of armored vehicles have been destroyed in and around Pokrovsk. We've seen that previously. I've shown you drone footage from the last couple of days of activity going on in the area. There have been large attacks into Myrnohrad and around Pokrovsk sort of 3 or 4 days ago, wasn't it? Right, here we have another personnel-oriented story anecdote. 3 Russians are dead after Ukrainian special forces launched a stealth raid behind enemy lines in Donetsk Oblast. The unit, I'm going to pause this because, fighting and deaths and whatnot. The unit crossed the front line on a recon mission and came back with captured enemy radios, documents, and navigation gear. I wonder how difficult operations like this really are, given the prevalence of drones. Right, so we've just looked at, or at least I've referenced, these montages of drones taking out individuals. Like any movement, we've heard from anecdotes from particularly Russian soldiers recently, but it's going to be the same for both sides. Any movement near the front line is very difficult. To do clandestine operations involving stealth and getting behind enemy lines when you've got eyes in the sky all over the place is difficult. I mean, yes, it's going to be virtually impossible to do a massive mechanized attack involving columns of vehicles. They're easily going to be spotted, but I think even individual troops, even when they've got thermal blankets on them, they seem to be easy to spot. And just any kind of secretive attack is just close to impossible. But here we have an account of one actually succeeding, getting behind enemy lines, and and succeeding in taking radios and eliminating some enemies. Mounting Ukrainian drone attacks in Russia are prompting Putin to tap a source of additional troops to try to protect vital infrastructure, according to Bloomberg. This is dipping into the story that I reported on previously about getting reserves called up and whatnot. A draft law will allow civilian reservists to be summoned in special call-ups and deployed to defend critically important sites. They are going to call up reserves, I guess, to defend sites maybe in Russia. The legislative amendments could affect as many as 2 million people, according to Alexei Zhuravlev, first deputy chairman of the Defense Committee in Russia's lower chamber of parliament. Now, if this happens, you know that Russia is desperate. They need to call up as many people as they can without doing a national force mobilization, because that would be politically suicidal. It was deeply unpopular when it was done in September 2022. They're trying everything they can to get people to the front line or into the armed forces in one way or another, and then turn them. You know, the idea is if you're a reservist or a conscript that can't go and fight on the front line, then you get them called up and then you kind of almost press gang them. You try everything you can to get them to sign a full-time contract and get them to the front line. And that's what Russia is doing an awful lot at the moment, which is a reflection of how desperate they are. Now, TCAG Commander Brad Crawford here, I don't know who this person is. It's a source saying, I have nearly 2 decades in the US Army and 3.5 years as a volunteer combat advisor in Ukraine. I hear directly from Ukrainian instructors and frontline soldiers the same stories. Russian units going into assaults with only one magazine, missing helmets and body armor, vehicles abandoned without drivers, and soldiers who simply refuse to fight. These first-hand accounts prove that the Russian army is not just under pressure, it is collapsing from the middle. The Russian land forces are breaking down completely. Mass shootings inside barracks, troops looting their own dead for gear, and the use of World War II era ammunition all reveal a force in total disarray. When an army cannot equip, feed, or command its men, it has already lost. The Russian commissioned officer corps barely exists, and junior officers are inexperienced and poorly trained. Without the leadership, that leadership core, units lose organization, discipline, and morale. Logistics are a nightmare, with vehicles out of service, ammunition stockpiles running low, and medical and communication equipment in short supply. Even elite formations are now a shadow of what they once were, forced to rely on untrained conscripts and prison recruits just to fill the ranks. After nearly 2 years of devastating losses, Russia's manpower crisis is impossible to ignore. So that's kind of building on the last point. Recruits are unmotivated, poorly equipped, and sent into battle with little preparation, while the few remaining professionals are exhausted and demoralized. What remains of the Russian army is running on borrowed time, stretched thin and held together only by fear and propaganda. That's a really good point, that last point, I think. Ukraine, on the other hand, continues to adapt, innovate, and fight with purpose. The contrast could not be clearer. Russia's army is dying from within, and Ukraine's strength, unity, and determination will carry it through to victory. Now, that's a very pro-Ukrainian position there, but I do wonder about this. I think there's a lot of truth in claiming that actually the Russians are really struggling with morale, with organization, with unity. We are hearing of, you know, I don't know that you can call it gunfights, but incidents of shootings at barracks back in Russia as well. And that should tell you something too. Now, let's go on to another source here. Anton Gerashenko talking about a radio intercept. In a recent radio intercept, Ukrainian intelligence recorded a war crime committed by Colombian mercenaries. Now, we know a lot of Colombians are fighting for Ukraine. That's one of the main countries they get consistent fighters from, but actually it's the same because they're mercenaries. They don't particularly have an ideological horse in this race, and so you'll find Colombians will maybe equally, I'd like to know the numbers, actually fight for Russia as they would for Ukraine. So here we have a story of Colombian mercenaries fighting against Ukraine as part of the 30th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, which belongs to the 2nd Combined Arms Army in Russia's Central Military District. In the intercepted conversation, one of the field commanders, speaking in Spanish, gives an order to execute Ukrainian civilians. He specifically orders his subordinates to shoot women and children. The killing of civilians is a regular and command-driven practice of Russia's 30th Motorized Rifle Brigade. Just 3 days ago, its servicemen committed yet another war crime by shooting civilians on the outskirts of Pokrovsk, which I reported as well. Now, the Russian command is trying to spread this practice to foreign citizens fighting for Moscow in order to make them accomplices in crimes against the civilian population. So that's all the personnel kind of stuff to talk about. We're going to move on to equipment, and we have a couple of Oryx loss lists here. First one is the Ukrainian loss list, 23 vehicles. The Russian loss list, 43 vehicles, so almost double. That's good news because actually Oryx doesn't include, as I always say, unarmored vehicles like quads, motorcycles, and golf buggies and whatnot. So we start with the Ukrainian loss list, and we have a few tanks to begin with, but no big sort of Western provided tanks of late, which I guess is good news. I often, I think about this both ways, and I've said this to you before. When the loss lists are full of predominantly Western equipment, it means they've cycled through the older Soviet era stuff, and they're using what they've been given, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because actually some of the Western provided stuff, most of it is better than the old Soviet kit. And so, when you see Strikers and Bradleys and things like that, that's kind of good because they're not using crappier BMP-1s and whatnot. But then on the other hand, you don't want to see them lose some of their prized Western assets. So, there are two sides to that coin. Okay. So anyway, Ukrainian kit here, we have a Bradley has been abandoned there. We've got 5 M113s. They are older Western pieces of kit. Bushmaster, Australian provided mobility vehicle, then MRAP. And a few other bits and pieces. We've got a Bogdana 4.0 self-propelled 155mm howitzer, and that's about that. So the rest are kind of drones, more significant drones. I wouldn't bother having drones on these lists personally. And then for the Russian losses, we have a T-55A tank, another T-55 last list for Oryx. I think there were 2 of them on there, and I think that's a telling sign if you're starting to see T-55s get lost frequently. I presume they're being used not as frontline tanks, but as glorified howitzers with indirect fire, but I don't know that for sure. So we have about 7 tanks on the list. We have 9 tanks. Then we have APCs, MTLBs and whatnot, BMP-1s, 2s and 3s. But as I've said before, mainly 2s and 3s. I think you're going to see fewer and fewer BMP-1s because they're not made anymore, and I think they've just exhausted their supplies. Got a Grad, 2 Grads actually, multiple launch rocket systems. They're destroyed. We've got an antenna vehicle for the Castor surveillance radar. That is, I think, probably quite high value bit of kit, and then trucks and whatnot. So I think the Ukrainians having a better day of it there. Now, no report says Russia's army has suffered a record vehicle losses in 2025, according to Ukraine's general staff. 32,681 trucks, tankers, and other vehicles have been destroyed so far this year. That's going to be largely underwritten by the destruction of motorcycles, quads, and golf buggies and whatnot. More than in 2022, 23, and 24 combined. Holy cow. In fact, I wonder if we go and look at Dell's stats here, you should get a precipitous rise in the graph for the vehicle losses. So if we go to, what do we have? Vehicles and fuel tanks. There we have it. Sorry, it's struggling a little bit, but you get, I know my face is in a way a little bit, you get a sense of that it has risen hugely. However, the trend line is going downwards. So yeah, interesting. But 2025, I mean, that is actually the rise is 2025. So look, all of this area here, that is all 2025. So yeah, no surprise. Actually, it is, this section is bigger than the rest of the war combined. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's joining up some of the dots there. What else do we have? just to finish that off, the total Russian automotive losses since the full-scale invasion began now exceed 65,000 vehicles of different types. Now, this is the scourge of the front line, the fiber optic drone. Look at all of these fibers, absolutely draped left, right, and center over trees, over fields, all over the front line. That gives you a real indication of how many fiber optic drones are used on a daily basis. I've said this before, that's going to be a bit of an environmental challenge for the Ukrainians after the end of the war. The Russians continue to use a small charge on a ramming FPV lance tip against Ukrainian reconnaissance drones. Now, this is a real success of the Russians here, I think. It conveys an advantage. One, it means that the interceptor drones are arguably reusable, and even if they aren't reusable, this is actually quite a cheap way of taking out the drone. So you don't need a massive explosive charge on your drone, a really heavy kind of RPG type explosive. You need just a small explosive put on the end of a lance, and then you ram that into the into the reconnaissance drone, and it's enough to send that drone packing. So even if the FPV drone isn't retrieved, I mean, hopefully for the Russian point of view, hopefully it would be retrieved. You can, it doesn't send your drone spinning down to the ground too often. But even if it isn't retrievable, saving the warhead mass would result in, as well, higher speeds. So it's not as loaded. You can get to go quicker. It means you can get from A to B more quickly and also catch up with these drones. Higher speed and also crucial flight time. So you can spend longer in the air because you're not as heavy. And that is a real advantage. So to complete an interception before the batteries fail. This is a real advantage that this kind of ramming drone has over other ways of intercepting. Now, another fantastic video coming out that looks rather like the kind of primary ones from Crimea that we see. Most evenings I report an airport closures on Russia and drone attacks on occupied parts of Ukraine, but make the point often we cannot find the results. However, last night Ukraine's drone struck in Zaporizhia, Kherson and Crimea. So this actually came out yesterday, but it just came out after I think I did my video. So taking care of a Book 3 M3 air defense and 2 Nebo SVU radars. Nebo radars are super expensive. Well, they're fairly decent bits of kit. And here we have, then those Nebo there you see. Big bit of kit getting taken out by these drones. I presume these are kind of larger than your typical FPV drones. Maybe are they something like a Beaver drone? I don't know. And here we have another target getting taken out. There you go. Bosh, that's gone. And then another Nebo radar. Really systematic, I think, approach to taking out Russian kit here. And if we look at, it's the Nebo SVU radar, we put cost of Nebo SVU radar, see what AI tells us, approximately $100 million. $100 million, if that is indeed correct, then wowzers, you are seeing in that video, you got a Book M3 air defense. So I don't know how much that is, but you got 200, I don't know, let's say $220 million worth of kit. Of course, it's not the financial cost of replacing this stuff because arguably they can't build some of this kit, complex radar arrays, but so therefore it's a functional cost. And that's kind of like, you can't put a price on that because they now just do not have that functionality in that area. And that should mean that the Ukrainians, it's like a snowball effect, can then have greater and greater success in using these drones. I mean, the fact that a drone takes out a radar that's, I guess, designed to spot drones is, somewhat ironic. Then we have a snippet from another video. So this is the extracted 12 seconds from a larger video below there. A Ukrainian SBU drone, SPU drone, reportedly a Punisher drone, struck a Russian S-300, S-400 air defense launcher with 2 munitions on the eastern front. So this is being used as a bomber. And and it's taken out that launcher. There are 2 launchers there. I would hope it's spotting for other drones to then come back and finish off the job, or whether the Russians would get out of dodge as soon as that first launch is hit. But really good to see those bombs dropping and directly hitting, landing on top. I mean, that's skilled, landing on top of the launcher there. So anyway, the SPU units released footage showing drone strikes destroying Russian personnel and equipment on the front lines. So all sorts of stuff getting taken out. And again, 1 minute 23 of just tanks and combat assets getting taken out, but also included there is the S-300, S-400 launcher. That's a super high value bit of kit. So some really good stuff here. Now, I'm going to show you this video, which I find remarkable, as I often do with these drone pilots. They really are pretty skilled. And here they get through a smallish hole in this warehouse or barn or whatever. Interesting that they kind of the drone gets knocked. I wonder how much knocking a drone like this can take beneath. Obviously, you knock it on top of the propellers and that's going to go down. So I guess it's better if you knock it below rather than on top. But yeah, amazing. Gets through that warehouse, gap in that warehouse there, and drives, flies through the rafters and then takes out that tank. Don't know how much damage was done to the tank, but that tank was hiding pretty well there. Here we have Ukrainian border guards from the Heart Brigade drone unit destroying 2 Russian tanks, a vehicle, an antenna, an electronic warfare system, and striking enemy personnel as well in the southern Slobozhanskina axis. So that's up in the Sumy area. Lots of kit getting taken out again. So all of these, it's a real purple patch for videos. Sometimes, like, we went through a whole period of time fairly recently where I was hardly seeing any videos, and now they seem to be back in on the social media. Yeah, just an awful lot of stuff to see. I thought this was quite interesting because I was talking about artillery quite a bit over the last few days, saying that actually it would be nice to see artillery hit these columns, because all the work's being done by both mines and drones. And actually, we talked about that Mad Max type vehicle that had 25 explosions on it before it was stopped, and that's just an awful lot of drones hitting it and mines not impeding it enough. That one had a mine roll on the front that would have helped it out quite a lot. And I was saying that wouldn't it be good if, because the kinetic power of these artillery shells, just give it that something extra. Like a drone has an RPG warhead on it or equivalent, and yeah, it flies into a tank, but it doesn't have that kinetic impact that a shell traveling over like 15 kilometers in the air, coming down with that speed, that metal, and then you have the explosion as well. So, but it's got the kinetic element as much as it has the explosive element, and that can obviously do a lot more damage to a tank, even if it has all that protection on it. Now you can see how useful artillery can be, as you see these troops filing into a Russian house here, or a house that they have under their control. 5 soldiers, I think it was. And then already you've had artillery working on these other places, but bang, just poof. So I've actually seen some drones pack a real punch these days. Having extolled the virtues of artillery ammunition, drones have really become a lot more explosive. And I've seen some smaller buildings just, totally collapse or being taken out by drones flying in there. But that's a pretty sizable bit of destruction from that artillery round. Okay, a Russian double tap, sadly, and I don't know if this is one I reported on yesterday, but maybe someone has died as a result of this, or whether this is another double tap strike on a rescuer in a fire and rescue unit. So there's that fire engine that was double tapped, I think, yesterday. Russian double tap strike missile killed a rescuer who responded to an initial drone attack. Master Sergeant Alexander Yehorichev was a driver of the 37th State Fire and Rescue Unit in eastern Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Another rescuer was wounded in the same strike. So really sad news there. And then we have a 23-year-old man. I don't know what the backstory to this is, whether it's just a mistake, someone had a hand grenade on them, or whether this was kind of sabotage, or whether this was someone with mental health issues. I don't know. A 23-year-old man from Kharkiv detonated a grenade during a document check on a train at Ovruch station in Zhytomyr region, killing himself, a border guard, and 2 civilian women. I mean, what unnecessary death. It's so heartbreaking. 12 others were injured, including 2 servicemen, according to Ukraine's national police. So that one hand grenade doing all sorts of damage to, and well, not just damage, killing people in Ukraine. Right, we're coming on to distance strikes now. And we have the infographic giving us an indication of what took place overnight. So before and after the ballistics attack on Kiev, it was quiet. Just 62 long-range drones were fired, of which 50 were intercepted. It's an 81% success rate. That's the kind of success rate we would like to see more of. It used to be 95% so very often, and that has really changed. But only 4 of the 9 Iskander-M rockets could be shot down. But at least they've got 4 ballistic missiles. Still 5 survived to get through. So the 5 missiles and 12 drones hit 11 different places, with debris affecting 4 others. So that is, not the worst night. But actually, it does seem like those ballistics did some damage in Kiev. So at least 2 people were killed and 9 injured in Russian ballistic missile attack on Kiev overnight. One of the victims initially reported among the injured died later in hospital, sadly. And here are some of the images that came out early morning from the ballistic attack. Now, I don't know what building that is, whether it is a residential building, whether it was a building that was targeted for strategic reasons, but yeah, it doesn't look like a residential building. That does look like it could be part of administrative or the military setup. I don't know, no idea. I'm completely speculating here, but that is a sad sight to see. A lot of damage seems to have been done there. 9 ballistic missiles were fired by Russia. 1 person died. So let's go through Tim White's thread here from this morning. 3 of the injured in Kyiv have been admitted to hospital. Russian ballistic missiles hit 3 districts of the capital. There were multiple fires, one at a non-residential building, which Reuters says was a food warehouse. I don't know if that's the same building we were just looking at. It doesn't look like it, to be honest. But yeah, and then no apologies for concentrating on Kiev this morning. With familiar stoicism, life goes on in Ukraine's capital. The grim irony here is 3 hours after Russia destroyed a food warehouse, the Saturday food market was underway, with smoke still billowing in the background. So that does look like that same place, actually, from here. There's a food market there. So it might well have been a food warehouse, actually, that was hit. I take that back. I just thought that this didn't look like it there. But anyway, that looked like you've got offices and whatnot. Could be 2 different places. Who knows? Okay, another strike impact site came in the heavily populated Darnitsky area of Kiev. The impact site is just missed a big apartment block, thankfully. Not only Kiev was attacked, though. The tragic news in the Dnipropetrovsk region, a firefighter was killed, another was injured in a double tap strike. So Petropavlivka. So it was not what I reported yesterday, although the fire engine looks very similar. It had the German words yesterday's one on the side. But double tap strikes on the fire service is not cool, obviously. So yeah, some imagery coming out of Dnipropetrovsk area. In Kiev, helicopters have been brought in this morning to douse the biggest fire in the city. Scenes reminiscent of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster almost 40 years ago, says Tim White. And then just seeing if we have anything else. Second person has died in a Kiev hospital following a ballistic missile attack on Russia, by Russia on Ukraine. And then, yeah, some pretty startling pictures there. Seems to be a spate of ceiling collapses across Russia. The latest contribution came at the newest railway station in St. Petersburg, Ladoshki station. No one was hurt. Interesting. Yeah, another attack on Kharkiv region this morning. The town of Lazova is without power yet again. An energy facility was hit, according to the regional governor there. Also, another energy facility was hit in Chuahiv. And there you go. So that's pretty much what has happened with regards to strikes inside Ukraine. And we see helicopters are still active, it appears, in Ukraine, with 2 people confirmed dead there. And then, yeah, Dnipropetrovsk, as we've seen, was also hit. Now, we also understand that 3 aerial bombs have reached Odessa region. Now, I'd like to know how far they got over the front line, because I think there is a growing challenge of Russian aerial guided glide bombs being able to reach further and further behind Ukrainian territory. And Rob Cook on my live the other day was asking about, well, you know, do we get to a point where these aren't actually, we can't really call them guided glide bombs? They because I was saying that actually there is evidence that they are using Chinese propulsion motors on them, so a bit like the Hammer AASM Hammer guided glide bomb that we call a guided glide bomb, but it's actually got propulsion on it. It's not really technically a bomb. It's kind of a hybrid between a bomb and a missile. And that's where we're possibly getting to with regard to some of these new guided glide bombs. They're getting further and further behind the contact line, and that is a real concern for the Ukrainians. Although 2 were shot down, it says here, which is some achievement, as they are difficult to intercept. So we know that other countries helping Ukraine are trying to develop. In fact, I've got some news on this in my military aid video I'll be doing later. That they're working on interception of guided glide bombs. That's very difficult, though. These are big, heavy bombs that are falling in a fairly well, I guess it depends where they're dropping these bombs. Or essentially, if you shoot down a ballistic missile that has a parabolic trajectory, if it's coming down like that, unfortunately, you know, you shoot it down in its kind of terminal phase, it's going to be landing fairly close to where you're shooting it down, and fairly close to where its actual target is. With guided glide bombs, it just depends what's on the way to that target, doesn't it? If you intercept it 20 kilometers away, then you're hoping it lands in a big field. But so I guess you're always going to want to intercept a guided glide bomb rather than let it hit its desired location, because you've got to assume the desired location is going to be much more high value than anything else that's on the way to it. So yeah, it's going to be super useful, because if they can start intercepting these guided glide bombs, because they're releasing 270 a day at times, the Russians, they are the scourge. I said that FPV drones and fiber optic drones are the scourge of the front. I don't think that's true, actually. I think guided glide bombs, they are the big challenge. I'd rather see the planes shot down, obviously, but you know, next best thing is going to be shooting down and intercepting these guided glide bombs. Ukrainian drone strikes. So now moving on to what Ukraine has achieved overnight. So Ukrainian drone strikes have taken out an electrical substation in Russia's Volgograd Oblast for the second time in 2 weeks. An electrical substation is in flames following a reported Ukrainian drone strike, according to the regional governor there. So this is a Novomykolaievsky 500 kilovolt Balashchovskaya power station or substation, key power transmission link primarily for the Moscow, Middle Volga, and Southern energy zone. So to hit that twice in a couple of weeks means that really it is probably a fairly high value target. Then there's news of this. So Tim White says it does seem as though Ukraine has hit the dam of the Belgorod Reservoir, in particular the hydraulic structure, and several buildings with technical equipment on the dam were damaged, according to MNS Media. 2 guards were allegedly injured. So this is the first time I've heard of the Ukrainians going for dam infrastructure. This is power generation that they have steered away from to some degree, but we've seen them start to go for thermal, combined heat and power plants and whatnot in recent weeks. This looks like a HIMARS attack on the infrastructure, the dam infrastructure. I don't know how much damage you're going to do with general HIMARS missiles, certainly not on a concrete infrastructure, but when it comes to some of the other equipment and mechanics that are involved in generating that power. Maybe you can stop a hydroelectric power station from working in its normal way. So who knows? But yeah, interesting strike there. Ukraine's drone strike shut down the main crude processing unit at Russia's fourth largest oil refinery in Ryazan. This is Reuters reporting that the strikes from the other night on a crude processing unit in Ryazan have caused it to shut down. Nearby units, including a reformer, gas oil hydrotreater, and catalytic cracker, were also halted. Another hit to Russia's energy infrastructure. Good news there, but nothing too much else from last night, really. Just the dam being hit, I think yesterday evening, maybe that was. And then this substation in Volgograd being hit. We're going to go back to what I reported on yesterday, which was reporting itself on either the night before or the night before that. So if you remember, there was that Plastmass military plant in Kopeisk in Chelyabinsk where it was a munitions factory that properly exploded and was hit by the Ukrainians. At least 12 people were dead, 10 more missing, actually maybe even more than that, and they're assumed dead. So there've been these days of mourning there because it really has been fairly catastrophic. Now, rescuers are still clearing the debris, and there's a van marked Cargo 200 stands near the ruins. So that's your code for dead, isn't it? 200 are dead, 300 are wounded. Then you've got 500. Are they deserters? 400 are, I don't know. Anyway, authorities deny a drone strike. So they're still denying it was anything to do with a drone strike. And they say a safety violation is under investigation. It could well have been a safety violation, or it could well have been a drone strike. We know that Russians would rather admit incompetence than Ukrainian competence. So quite often we see them claiming to have shot down their own planes accidentally rather than admitting that the Ukrainians have been able to hit one of their planes from behind enemy lines and whatnot. So as mentioned, there are these days of mourning, a day of mourning for the 12, but wait, maybe 23 or perhaps 41 who were killed in the explosion at Chelyabinsk chemical plant. Of course, it's nothing to do with the military production. So grieving put flowers on a Z tank in Kopeisk. So yeah, confused about the numbers on the previous post. Well, officials in Kopeisk say 12 died, but 11 are missing. So they're also dead. One group on social media posted a list of 31 employees in one section. 13 have been found, 18 unaccounted for, but they still support the war. From a military point of view, though, if this is a munitions factory and 31 skilled employees have been killed, it's not only about, well, let's ramp the production back up by, getting this bit of capital, this bit of machinery or whatnot. If you are missing that many people who know how to operate this machinery and build these bits of ordnance, then you're in trouble going forward. This could be a very, very successful hit for the Ukrainians on a military industrial complex. If that makes munitions that are really vital for Russia's frontline activities, then it's good news for the Ukrainians. Okay, moving on, we have UK Defence Secretary. This is the other bits and pieces section. The UK Defence Secretary, John Healey, has warned Putin, saying, "We're hunting your submarines," according to the BBC. He revealed a 30% rise in Russian vessels near UK waters. John Healey, joined by Germany's defence minister, said, quote, "Russia is testing us, but we're watching you." I love that kind of ominous tone. Now, news that a British court has sentenced 6 men to prison terms ranging from 7 to 23 years for torching a London warehouse storing humanitarian aid for Ukraine. They were working on orders from Russia's Wagner Group, according to The Guardian and Sky News. This is good news that, a strong signal is being sent. To be honest, the Russians are really good at just, these people I doubt would have any interest in the war in Ukraine. It's not like these people are anti-Ukraine or pro-Russian. I doubt. These are, low aspiration youths who have been offered a bunch of money in order to go and just set fire to something. Yeah, easy money. Dylan Earl, 21, orchestrated the March 2024 attack from his bedroom in Leicestershire, communicating with Wagner operatives through Telegram. The arson caused £1 million in damage and required 60 firefighters to control the blaze at the Leighton warehouse, which stored Starlink satellite equipment and supplies bound for Ukraine. The judge called it part of a planned campaign of terrorism and sabotage. serving Russian state interests. Police found a Russian flag. Okay, it might well be a bit of ideology involved. £20,000 in cash, woof, and cocaine in Earl's home, along with phone messages showing he had planned to kidnap a Russian dissident and discussed arson attacks in the Chechnya. Okay, so wow, it looks like this Dylan chap probably did have some ideological connection. I wonder if that's the same for all of them. I would imagine there are disaffected youths being co-opted here by the Russians quite easily. This is something they've done over across Europe and even in Ukraine, where you have teenagers and young people, burning military vehicles because they've been convinced online or blackmailed or given enough cash or crypto to actually overcome their ideological positioning. Earl and his co-conspirator Jake Reeves became the first people convicted under Britain's National Security Act 2023. So this is the act that the China spies should have been prosecuted on, the one that's just fallen apart because the previous government prosecuted them on the 1911 Official Secrets Act, which is much harder. Actually, these guys could have been prosecuted on the 1911 one because I think we're fine with calling Russia the enemy, but we're not so happy with calling China the enemy, even though they are helping out Russia quite a bit. Anyway, a new law designed to counter foreign sabotage and espionage. Right, moving on. Zelensky, who was in London yesterday, meeting the coalition of winning leaders, Zelensky said China is helping Russia, as I was just talking about, and he's right, says no report. Satellite images show a sanctioned Russian LNG tanker transferring 170,000 square meters of gas to a Hong Kong-linked ship near Malaysia days after Trump sanctioned Rosneft and Lukoil. First documented case of a China-linked help to dodging US sanctions. And in fact, you can find satellite images of this. Let's look through this. Tim White has it. I'm sure he has. I'm sure I saw it. This is where I'm going to struggle to find it now. No, that was on yesterday's thread. I think it's on today's thread, or it's later on here. Damn it. No, I haven't found it. I am gonna find this though. Dagnamit, I'm gonna find it. Anyway, there is now imagery that is available to see these. I'm gonna find this for you. Here it is. So Bloomberg shows Russia and China already conspiring to flout new sanctions, says Tim White. Satellite pictures show sanctioned Russian Shadow Fleet tanker Pearl transferring cargo to a Chinese tanker off the Malaysian coast. 170,000 cubic meters, of LNG went on the Hong Kong-bound CCH gas, which turned off its tracking systems. So there you go. Something needs to be done about that ship, or both of those. A pledge to get Russian oil and gas out of global markets. 20 plus nations came together at a London summit. So this is a coalition of willing yesterday. Quote from Zelensky: "We agreed on decisions that can help us significantly." And importantly, he went on to say, "We won't share all details publicly yet to make it harder for Putin." I talked about this last night in my breaking news update, whereby this is what we want to hear. So sometimes I think there is this clamor to get things onto social media and out into the news so that you control the PR narrative for the war. But sometimes things are discussed or information is shared that really shouldn't be. Sometimes I feel bad telling you stuff. I mean, it doesn't matter from my point of view, as in, like, I'm not doing any damage. It's already out there, right? I'm just aggregating all of the bits of all of the claims and all the different sources online. But it should never, some of these things should never get out there, right? You're just thinking, why are you signposting what you're doing or what you're going to do? So this idea that he's hinted at undisclosed decisions made during the coalition of winning summit, I think is good. Keep it quiet, but also hint that actually there's some big things coming. Good things coming, saying details remain confidential to make things harder for Putin. He emphasized that sanctions are hitting Russia hard. Fuel shortages, bankrupt regions, and a bleeding budget, all of which he said personally affect Putin. I reported yesterday at length on 6 regions that are looking very precarious in terms of bankruptcy. Now, Rosneft and Lukoil's value, according to the Moscow Times, has already plummeted by $5.2 billion after Trump's sanctions. Their shares led the decline among blue chip stocks in the Moscow exchange after 2 of Russia's largest oil companies were hit by blocking US sanctions. Good news there. And almost 11 p.m. in Moscow. Here's some nice bedtime reading for Putler, says Tim White again. Indian oil giant Reliance says "Dos Vidania" to Russian oil. It's the biggest company in India by both turnover and market value, and issued this statement, quote, "We have noted the recent restrictions announced by the European Union, the UK, and the United States on crude oil imports from Russia and export of refined products to Europe. Reliance is currently assessing the implications, including the new compliance requirements. We will comply with the EU's guidelines on the import of refined products into Europe. Whenever there is any guidance from the Indian government in this respect, as always, we will be complying fully. Reliance has consistently aligned itself with the objective of ensuring India's energy security. The company remains fully committed to maintaining its long-standing and impeccable record of adherence to applicable sanctions and regulatory frameworks, and will be adapting the refinery operations to meet the compliance requirements. As is customary in the industry, supply contracts evolve to reflect changing market and regulatory conditions. Reliance will address these conditions while maintaining the relationships with its suppliers. Reliance is confident that its time-tested, diversified crude sourcing strategy will continue to ensure stability and reliability in its refining operations for meeting the domestic and export requirements, including to Europe. Okay, it's a lot of verbiage there, but that's really good news. That's all the right indicators to show that actually Reliance will adhere to the sanctions and the restrictions, and that's all kind of good news. Now, here I've got it here. I did have this coming later, but there are still loopholes that people are willing to capitalize on, and the Shadow Fleet provides Russia the ability to get around these sanctions. Now, just as a sidebar here, I don't know what this is all about, but migrants armed with shovels and metal rods have clashed in Moscow, leaving 3 wounded. Russians reported hearing shouts in an incomprehensible language. So some discontent, possibly. We know that the migrant community has been targeted by the Russians because they are easy pickings for forced conscription, forced mobilization, right? If they go to the Wild Berries, which is like their version of Amazon, Wild Berries warehouses, and they find all these migrant workers, either undocumented, so illegal immigrants, also legal immigrants, because they're just easier to force to join up. They might not have families in Russia. There's no kind of legal ramifications for Russia in getting both legal and illegal immigrants like off the streets or out the warehouses. You know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do is they're I guess one of their rationales here. So if they were illegally, if you like, press ganging Russian residents, ethnic Russian residents into military units, then families and extended families and colleagues will start kicking off. But with migrants, they are typically easy pickings. Now, I don't know if this has anything to do with that, but there are growing tensions. There have been, particularly since the Crocus City Hall Tajik terrorist attack, where quite a number of Russians were killed there. You started seeing much more negative, and it was already growing, but much more negative opinions of, you know, foreigners and migrant workers and whatnot from there on in. And, you know, this is, I guess, the latest iteration of tensions between communities. But yeah, so that has been happening over the last 24 hours in Moscow. And then as we sort of meander to the end here, Russia and Ukraine are reasonably close to a diplomatic end to the war, says Russian Presidential Special Representative Kirill Dmitriev. So he was one that hopped on a plane and visited the US. I did a live stream, breaking news update with Jonathan Fink yesterday discussing this. He's already talking up how close, I mean, to say that they're reasonably close to a diplomatic end to the war seems to me a little bit unrealistic. I mean, I keep thinking it's looking further and further away as the US tries its hardest to get Russia to do something. Russia just routinely refused to. They've whacked sanctions on them. Russia have gone, whatever, sanctions don't mean much to us, not going to hurt us. But then Kirill Dmitriev jumps on a plane and gets straight to Washington. So you're thinking, you know, wondering really where Russia are with regard to how willing they are to bring this to an end, because they must be hugely hurting at the moment, economically speaking. Now, I'd like to leave you on a positive note. So what I want to do, although my face is in the way there, let's try and get one where it isn't. This is obviously Zelensky at 10 Downing Street meeting Keir Starmer yesterday in the UK. But what I love here is, especially when Zelensky went to the White House the other day, no one met him off the airplane. Off the plane, he was met by his own ambassadorial staff, right? The embassy staff, Ukrainians. There's no Americans meeting him off the plane. Here, he gets a solid, warm welcome into Downing Street and a warm welcome out of it. And they get a load of pro-Ukrainians or Ukrainians there cheering him out afterwards. And I love it. And there's a warmth there. And let's have some. Loads of kids, probably, Ukrainian diaspora community welcoming outside Downing Street. And that's what I'd like to see. It's just a little thing, but I think it means a lot. Because this is about also having this on the news, like, for example, and just Herem Slava, Slava Ukraine, Herem Slava. This is about communicating to anyone watching the news that Ukraine is positive, that we are on Ukraine's side, that you're communicating consistently that Ukraine are the good guys, right? We would never do this for Russia. Whereas when you go to the United States at the moment, it was different under the Biden administration, and there was standing ovations in Congress. You don't get that now. There just isn't that feeling. And we need to have that feeling that Ukraine are the good guys, Russia the bad guys, and it needs to be very obviously, but also implicitly communicated. And I think this is doing that. Anyway, I just thought I'd point that out, which I think is important. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.